So it's really great to see the teams come together at the end and even playing with each other's rover systems. So you can see one of the guys from Poland operating Oregon State's rover here. They're all sitting around checking out each other's systems, and you can see the Magma team, York University, and Oregon State off in the distance there. The three rovers lined up. And here is the final shot of our top three teams. In the orange, Oregon State, they walked away with 315 out of 400 points. That's the highest point total we've seen at URC by a very large margin. The battle for second was extremely close. York with 209, the Magma with 203. And if you think about those 4 meters that the Magma team passed by the rover, just look in the wrong direction, turn right, and second place is theirs by a hefty margin. And it's literally that close. Look right, look left. So I'll take this opportunity to thank the volunteers and judges that were out in the field. John Baranka, who I know is here, not sure if he's out in the crowd. Heather Smith, Andrew Duncan, Melinda Wales, Ryan Kobrick, Graham Lau, and Dave Manser, representative from TASC. And of course, I have to thank TASC, our title sponsor for this year. And before I introduce Florian, I just wanted to expand upon something Robert Zubrin was mentioning last night at the banquet. This has been a great event for the last 4 years, but it's really at a crossroads, at a point where we need to think about expanding this event. To do that, we need to build up a strong management team. It's starting to become more than our current small team can really put together. So if there's anyone out there that's interested in getting involved in a management role with this, come and find me and talk to me. If you want to drop me an email, I'm easy to reach. It's just kevin@marssociety.org, or I'll be floating around the rest of the day. So feel free to grab me if you're at all interested. It's a lot of work to do, but it's a wonderful opportunity to work with some of the absolute best college students out there. It is a true privilege and a lot of fun to be out there in the field. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Florian from the Oregon State team.
Okay, well, thanks for having me here. My name is Florian Kapsenberg. I'm the lead mechanical engineer on the OSU Mars Rover team for 2010. I was responsible for the overall design of the chassis. The arm was done as a senior project, but the design and managing the construction of it was my responsibility. So I'll talk about a quick overview of the 2009 Rover and what we learned from it. And then I'll go over how we applied that to the 2010 design, and there'll be a lot of pictures of all the testing we've done, which is pretty entertaining. And I'll show you some pictures of the competition, similar to what Kevin's already showed you. Also go over a lot of the public outreach events we've done. We added them up last night, and it's a total of about 13 different public events where we exposed the rover to the public and encouraged people to learn more about Mars and Mars Society and University Rover Challenge. And there'll be some videos including first-person point of views, what we saw through the rover's cameras, so you have an idea of what we have to work with. So here's the 2009 rover. It's very different looking. It was a very rigid box, and we learned a lot about what not to do. So some of the things included, don't use the drivetrain. This rover relied on 2 heavy motors inside that were one linked to each side through chains. Chains are very heavy. It's more components that can break. They require sprockets and other shafts. They also require bearings, which are heavy as well as susceptible to sand and just more things to break. So we figured we'd do away with all that. So we didn't know what we were going to do, but we knew we weren't going to do these things. We also decided not to use narrow tires. As you can see in this picture, they dig in pretty well, especially when you rely on skid steering to steer around. It's like a plow. And it requires so much torque that it actually broke our chains. So we would stay away from that as well. A rigid chassis doesn't keep all wheels grounded. If you have 4 wheels and you're driving over uneven terrain, you're at best going to have 3 on the ground at any time, 2 of which are carrying majority of the weight. So combine that with narrow tires and it's very hard to drive around. As Kevin mentioned, Cartesian arm control was something that we were going to look forward to. We used a spherical coordinate arm. It was very difficult to control, and we weren't able to really do anything with that on 2009. We also decided we would use an easily accessible electronics bay, that we had a big hatch we could just take off. We wouldn't have anything going through it, just 2 simple clips and the whole thing would come off. And that allows us to troubleshoot it much more easily without taking the thing apart. As well as the modules inside, we said would have to be easily removable. We had boxes screwed into the chassis and we'd had to cut zip ties and undo cables and screw open the boxes before we could even access them. So these are all things that were very, very bad design practices that we would stay away from. And that was good because it allowed us to build this. And this is our 2010 Rover. As you can see, we have 6 wheels. They are no longer narrow tires, they're now big fat balloon tires. They're very lightweight. They only weigh 3 pounds for the whole wheel assembly. We have a drive motor inside of each of these wheels, so they're independent now. We can control the speed of each motor through the software. Each of these 2 wheels are paired on what we call a bogie, and they're independently hinged. And that allows for a very flexible chassis that conforms to any terrain without the need of suspension, shock absorbers, such as that. And we also stayed away from bearings. These are bushings inside, so they don't require any lubrication. They can handle sand and all that. We accommodated sand in our design as just expecting it would get in, so we made sure that we would just allow it to be okay. We also have a tripod, and that allowed us to position our cameras anywhere of the Rover in advance of any event, which also was very effective. We used, I think, 3 or 4 different configurations. So here's an overview of the design process. We used a team website that all the team members had access to. It had various design categories. You can see here the wheels, motors, chassis, electronics, camera systems, firmware. All these different categories allowed people to update and add to the design without having to meet necessarily. So we would always have access to the most current version of the design. We also had a downloadable, I believe it's here, CAD model that anybody could download and have the most recent version. We also set up a realistic timeline that allowed us to do as well as we did. We knew that we lacked a lot of time for testing in 2009, so we set up, okay, by January we'll finish all of our mechanical building and we'll have a complete chassis ready to populate with electronics. And all the electronics were set to be ready and functioning by spring break, so that allowed us to go on a trip for spring break and simulate all of the tasks we need to do and do a full test. And then we would have all of spring to test and improve and fix all the problems we come up with. And we were able to stick to that schedule very well. One of the things that helped us stay on the schedule was all our public events, and I'll go through that too. We had weekly design meetings that allowed everyone to see what was going on. We could discuss our ideas. As well, we had a projector up with the CAD model that we would rotate around and look at the areas of interest. So everyone knew what was going on and how their ideas fit into the overall design. We did a lot of testing, then we fixed things to improve the reliability, and then more testing, and just cycle through that loop over and over and over, at least 13 times, because that's how many events we did. So here's the basic origin of our chassis idea. I knew of this basic design. You can see here is 2 independent bogies. This cab here is hinged separately on this main chassis there. It's meant for low speed, which we drive at. It's a slow robot. Doesn't require high-speed shock, like suspension, like shock absorbers, like race cars and cars use. So it was very effective. It doesn't require all the components that a normal suspension would. So here's the top view. One of the really functions I'm quite proud of, these 4 actuators here. They're responsible for being able to steer the Rover like that, and allows us to spin in 360 degrees, so we can turn over very complex obstacles without having to skid our tires, which is very important over rocks and those sort of things. And then we can straighten them out and drive off again. So we use these various configurations to do all throughout our tasks, and you'll see some of that as well. Here's some of the chassis wiring that we've done. We elected to route everything through the chassis as much as we could to keep it exposed from the outside environment. As Kevin mentioned, wires can get tugged on and pulled loose. Routing everything internally really helped that. And we had big connectors on the end that would plug into our electrical bay, so we could just take that off as well. All we had to do is take off some connectors. So a lot of this was focusing on reliability, which we all knew was the biggest problem in 2009. Here you can see a close-up. We got our serial data for the motor controllers coming through, the power, and the power going to the motors, all routed internally. Our motor controllers here, We strip the stock heat sinks off and heat sink that to the chassis to save weight and also